This video is about my own personal artistic journey. The things I say and any advice I give is based on my experiences alone. I will offer my insights, but by no means does this mean you should follow them. If what I say resonates with you, then great, and if not, I hope at least it will provide a view into the life of someone else, and hopefully it'll be informative. I decided for this video that I'd record it over a self-portrait caricature, because I'm talking about myself here, so yeah. So the first drawing I made was, I think I was 3, it was a portrait of my father. I remember looking at the drawing and thinking, wow, this looks so realistic. I wish I still had the drawing because I'm curious as to what it actually looked like. I'm sure it probably looked nothing like my dad, but that was what I thought at the time. So my first experience with art was fairly positive. But I didn't really consider myself an artist. I wasn't always drawing all the time or anything like that. I thought of art as something I was good at, but what I always wanted to be when I grew up was a scientist. I spent most of my early childhood reading about dinosaurs and mythology and astronomy and writing stories. I would draw more in school when I was bored. I think art for me really was something to do when you were bored. I think it was in grade 4 or 5 though. I took a trip with my family to California, and we were walking in this open marketplace, and they had comics. Now my parents never really bought us things, unless they were really cheap, but this place had some old Marvel comics selling for like 5 cents, and so I asked them if I could get some, and they begrudgingly let me. I still don't know why I even bought the comics. I never saw other kids my age reading comics, and I had never thought about comics before. But once I read those, I was hooked to the world of comics. Now my parents never gave us pocket money, and ever since I was young they told me I had to save my money for university. So I saved any money I got from relatives on birthdays or holidays, and that was my fund for university. It's ridiculous to think about it now, but I had saved up close to $300, and that was supposed to be what I'd use to pay for my university. And I was planning to go to Harvard because I heard it was a good school. But after the comic bug bit me, I found out where the closest comic book store was. It was about an hour walk away, and I started secretly buying these comics using the money that was meant for my education. I talked my brother into coming along too, and we'd go and maybe spend $50 each time on buying stacks of comics. We managed to keep them hidden from my parents, who I don't think would have approved. So my first artistic heroes were guys like Todd McFarlane, J. Scott Campbell, Joe Madureira, and Michael Turner. When I was 11 or 12, I made up a card game, and I bring it up because I still have the cards I made at that time. You can see how influenced I was by the American comic books of the time. I can't help but be embarrassed looking at these, but that's what I used to draw. My infatuation with comics didn't really last long once I started high school at 13. At this point, my interest shifted more into video games and anime, and for most of my high school years, I didn't draw much at all. When I would draw, it would mostly be out of boredom during classes or for a joke. I used to do these drawings of my teachers. I suppose you would call them caricatures, but I didn't know that at the time. There was one teacher I had in foods class in grade 9. Now there were a few guys in the class, but mostly it was girls. Anyway, this teacher, who was a lesbian and a feminist, would always treat the boys and girls completely different. For example, the girls were allowed to move from one table to another and talk to each other, but if the guy did it, she'd tell the guy to sit back down. Well, I guess I was a bit mean-spirited at the time, but I did this drawing of her with a cow's body. Apparently the likeness was pretty good because she somehow got a hold of it, and she was crying when she approached me about it. She told me to meet her near the principal's office after school, but she never showed up, and I really didn't care that it offended her. Prior to this, I was always getting in detention almost every class, and this for me wasn't unusual because I was held for detention every day in my grade 8 arts class for doing something or other inappropriate. I guess I just had trouble with teachers who I didn't think were fair or who I felt shouldn't be teaching, and I'd express that dissatisfaction with bad behavior. I think a lot of artists have had experience in school where the art teacher doesn't know what they're talking about, and often can't even draw, and you end up making papier-mâché masks and whatnot, and never really learn a thing about art. That was my experience with art class in high school, though. So I only took it in grade 8 and then again in grade 12 for the easy credit. Mind you, I got a C in art in grade 12, so I wasn't a real great student. Or rather, I wasn't good in classes I didn't like. I'd usually either get A's or C's. Anyway, as far as art was concerned, I would often go a couple of months without drawing anything. I wasn't good at my science courses though, so my ideas of going to Harvard quickly disappeared. I was surrounded by people in my school who drew better than me. I guess for a while I wasn't really thinking about what I wanted to be or where I was headed until grade 10 when I started to feel that I probably should get better at art because science is probably not going to work out for someone like me. But where to start? The instruction I had received in art thus far wasn't helping. So I started looking online and I joined a popular art forum of the day called Julie's How to Draw Anime Forum, run by Julie Dillon. Because I was so into animes and RPGs, I tried to draw things in a more anime style, but I was still a bit influenced by the American comics I had read earlier. At the time, I knew of two main art forms. One was Julie's, and the other was called Seigen. I looked at Seigen and I was intimidated by the work, which I felt was far beyond my level, and honestly, I wasn't interested in the style or the subject matter of what was made. It was pretty much all concept art, and you'd see a lot of paintings of military vehicles, environments, and monsters, all of which I didn't care too much for. I preferred drawing anime guys with huge swords, or scantily clad females. I also would sometimes draw my funny images that I'd share with friends at school. Sometimes I would draw things that I wouldn't show other people, and those were always pictures of faces, usually sad or angry faces, but I would rip them up after drawing them. And the times I did those were very rare anyway. A friend I had from Julie's forum told me something I'd like to touch on. He was a slightly better artist than I was, but he was never really improving. He had this theory that every artist had a limit to their artistic potential, and he had simply reached his, and that's why he wasn't improving. He said that I hadn't reached mine yet, which is why I was still improving. I just want to say that this concept is entirely nonsense. Had I known as much then as I know now, I'd be able to direct him to methods of practice that he could use and specific ways he could improve. The idea of people having some limit to their potential based on talent is crazy. Art is a skill, and you can always improve it, either through gained knowledge or correct practice. Anyway. Things took a major turn for me though in grade 11 when I had a class with a graphics teacher who actually knew how to draw. Her class was mainly about drawing type, silkscreening, and logo design, but I would just draw whatever I wanted and she didn't seem to mind that. She'd also take my drawings and redraw them and point out my mistakes. When she'd draw, I'd watch her and that's how I learned about perspective. Before this, I had read a lot of tutorials in books and online about how to draw in perspective. They always looked the same to me, like pictures of things with a bunch of lines on them and some dots labeled VP. I read about what the horizon was and that VP meant vanishing points, but I never really could figure it all out in my head. It just didn't make sense. But when I saw this teacher drawing, she was drawing a picture of the room we were in, and I saw how she was drawing the horizon and vanishing points. It all suddenly clicked and I understood what all those lines meant. I also discovered a lesson that stuck with me ever since. It's much easier to learn how to draw when you can see someone drawing in front of you, instead of looking at still images. So this was a huge help for me. This teacher was good with writing, and a few times I'd let her read stories I'd written. She commented that I was a better writer than an artist, and after she said that, I stopped writing entirely. Maybe that doesn't make much sense, but I'll try to explain. I used to feel that what I created was a reflection of who I was as a person. If I was good at something, that meant I was a better person. I would judge my self-worth on what my art was like, for example. This is a terrible thing to do, but that's where I was at the time. I'd also want desperately to be the best at what I was doing, and exceed the expectations of those around me. When the teacher said I was better at writing than art, I immediately felt that if I continued writing, it would mean that I would have to be the best writer, and that would mean I'd have to work a lot at writing, and honestly, I didn't want to do that because I never felt writing was as enjoyable to do as drawing. So I stopped writing and became single-minded in my focus to become an artist. It's really weird when I think about it, how powerful a simple sentence from someone you respect can be. But this teacher said many things that really changed who I'd become. One of the most artistically impactful things she said was an observation she made about the artwork I was creating. As I mentioned before, I'd often draw anime-ish superhero characters with big swords. Occasionally I'd draw dragons or demons or monsters as well. Anyway, my teacher was sifting through a few of my drawings and casually said, "It's all about power." I asked her what she meant, and she pointed out to me that the swords, the dragons, the strong characters, they were all images of power. I guess you could say I had an aha moment, but to call it that seems to be a bit of an understatement. As soon as she said that, it all made sense to me. She was absolutely right. The things I would draw were always powerful characters. And I also could see the hidden meaning of what she was saying, which was, you're drawing powerful characters because you don't feel powerful yourself, and you wish you had power. In the span of a second, I could see the work I had done. I could see how clearly it was attached to my childhood, which had contained a lot of violence. And I felt really angry. I felt angry because I didn't like how someone could sum me up so easily. And suddenly, I didn't feel connected to drawing anime drawings of people with weapons. I thought about it, and the images that I really wanted to represent me were the sad and angry faces I'd draw and not show anyone. I felt that that was the real art I should be doing. I decided I would become a fine artist, and I wanted my art to be about deep emotions. I wanted people to look at my art and be able to see how I was feeling, and maybe even feel what I felt. I wanted people who felt alone with their feelings of sadness and pain to be able to feel that there was someone else out there like them. I know now, looking back, it looks like a pretty lofty goal, but that's how I thought at the time. Maybe that's still how I think, I don't know. Anyway, so now I had a vague sense of what I wanted my art to be, but I didn't know exactly what it should look like. I know I wanted it to be representational. I didn't want to do something too abstract because I felt that looking into the eyes would much better convey what I wanted. And I wanted the eyes to look back at the viewer. Often in art, artists will paint images of people, but they won't have the characters looking directly towards you for a number of reasons. It maintains the fourth wall and allows you to view an image instead of having to be engaged by the image. In illustration, it's often unnecessary. Often a character staring at you can be uncomfortable or aggressive. It's more common to use the body language and subject matter of what a character is doing to express what they're feeling. So I figured I needed to learn to draw faces very well in a representational manner. But at this stage, I didn't know what I didn't know. To give you an idea of the time frame, this turning point for me happened in the year 2000. I don't think conceptart.org was up yet, and there wasn't DeviantArt, so much of what is available now wasn't available at the time. I was aware of Andrew Loomis's book, Figure Drawing for All It's Worth, but that didn't cover painting, so I decided my first step would be to look at the work of people doing paintings, and at that time, the place I knew that had people doing paintings was Sycra. I knew this didn't have exactly what I wanted, but I really was clueless at this point. Looking through Sycra forums, I'd often see the name Sargent come up. Now I had heard this name before, and I looked up the works, but I wasn't really interested in painting at the time and I kind of ignored him. But now, since I knew I wanted to learn how to paint, and people kept talking about him, I wanted to understand what was so great about John Singer Sargent. So I downloaded all the images I could find by Sargent and spent a lot of time looking at them. I could tell he was really good from looking at his works, but the subject matter didn't really appeal to me. I wasn't getting the emotion I wanted. I also spent a lot of time on Sycra following Craig Mullins. who in the past would post there. His work was also incredible, but again, I didn't see the emotion I wanted to see. Man, just writing this makes me want to slap my young self in the head and say, "You dummy, if you could paint like Sargent or Craig Mullins, you could get all the emotion you wanted." But at the time, painting was something completely mysterious to me, and I thought painting was about styles, and if you painted in a certain style, you'd get a look that would define your subject matter. I still wasn't drawing much. There were days I wouldn't draw at all. I just had this general idea of what I wanted to do, and I'd look at art forums and read a lot. But, as often happens, life gets in the way, and there was a long time when art was second on my mind. In grade 12 in British Columbia, where I live, that's the last grade before you enter post-secondary education, I decided I'd check out Emily Carr, which was the most famous local art school, to see whether it was somewhere I'd like to go. When I went there, though, the artwork they had on the walls was thoroughly unimpressive, and I was told that Emily Carr teaches how to be creative. I didn't want to learn how to be creative, I wanted to learn how to paint. They also required a portfolio containing sculpture, collage, and other things I had no interest in. I think the school is different now, though. A lot of things have changed in art since that time. There's a long period where representational art wasn't encouraged in schools. A lot of the traditional methods for painting were lost. Now things are completely different. There is so much good art around. There are actually schools that you can go to specifically to learn how to be a concept artist, for example. There are huge art communities and tons of resources available. But it wasn't long ago that this wasn't the case. Anyway, so I didn't feel like I wanted to attend a BS art school. I applied to a local college instead because it was cheap, and at least I'd get to do some figure drawing. I thought it'd give me some time to think of what school I really wanted to attend and how to get there. Art schools tend to be extremely expensive, and even scholarships often don't apply for the first-year students. Since my parents weren't paying for my education, going to some of the better American schools wasn't really an option for me. But my application to the local college didn't go through because they had lost my transcript, and by the time they found it, the deadline for admission had already passed, and I'd have to wait a year before I could apply again. I figured I'd just take things into my own hands. I found that there was a life drawing place that was about 2 hours away, so for the summer after graduating, I spent my time taking transit to go to this life drawing place. Most of the people who were there were middle-aged women and a few older men. There was one other person my age, and a guy who was running the place. He was 27, the same age as I am now. And he'd attended Emily Carr, the school I didn't want to go to, but he seemed to be alright. At least he was painting with oils. I asked him if he taught, and he did. For students, it was $20 an hour, and I had some money from working at non-art jobs, so I decided I'd take some lessons with him. His name was Justin Ogilvie. And since I took lessons from him, he's really grown to become a really awesome fine artist. Anyway, I took lessons from him for the summer, but then more life stuff came up, and I ended up working on art very little for the next couple of years. Around 2003, I realized that not drawing wasn't going to help me become a better artist, and I decided I would force myself to draw every day. It may sound weird for someone who's an artist to have to force themselves to draw. Shouldn't drawing be something an artist loves to do? Shouldn't it be something that you're passionate about doing? I think that's probably true. All the really good artists I know fit this category. They draw every day because they love art. For me, it really wasn't like that. As I mentioned before, art was something I used to base my self-worth on. I chose to do art because I wanted to be good at something. I liked writing and I loved music, but I preferred drawing to writing, and as for music, I had never taken any music lessons, so I doubted that it was something that was possible for me. Art to me was something I wanted to be good at because I wanted to be good at something. It's actually really annoying for me to hear myself say that because I think that that's such a bad reason to be doing something. But anyway, I started a sketchbook journal and I draw every day in it. I really didn't know how much a professional artist was supposed to draw. I just knew that I needed to start at least drawing something once a day, and if I could build on that, it'd be better than what I'd been doing for the past few years. For someone just starting out, I'd really recommend making the easy goal of drawing something every day. For me, I didn't give myself any time or quality limits, meaning I could draw for as long or as little as I wanted, and it didn't have to be really good. The important thing was just to be drawing something every day. I didn't show anyone my sketchbook, so I didn't have to worry about anyone judging me based on my work. I found that pretty quickly, maybe as short as 2 weeks, my daily drawings in my sketchbook just became something I do out of habit. And doing a drawing in there didn't really feel like I'd done any art. So it encouraged me to do more and more art every day. And really, the only way you can really make big progress with art is if you're constantly drawing. But it doesn't make sense to tell yourself you need to suddenly go from drawing once a week to drawing for 10 hours a day. You need something to ease you into it so that you can build a stable routine. To this day, I still do a drawing every day in my sketchbooks. I consider my sketchbook drawings to be much more like what I really would call my own work. Here's a look at some of the work from my older sketchbooks.